This is part 2 of our investigation of specific argument forms with inductive reasoning. In the first part, we considered statistical syllogisms and inductive generalizations. We'll pick up with the numeration from there. And so our third argument form is that of an argument from analogy. If things of one type have several characteristics in common with things of another group, and the latter group also has another characteristic, then the former type usually has that further characteristic as well. So we could express the general form of arguments from analogy in this way. We have objects of type X that have characteristics F, G, and H, and then we know of another group, objects of type Y, that have those same characteristics F, G, and H, and also Z. If those are the case, then we can conclude that objects of type X also have characteristic Z. So for example, all the houses on the east side of the street have green lawns, large driveways, 3-car garages, and slate roofs. All of the houses on the west side of the street have green lawns, large driveways, 3-car garages, slate roofs, and also have swimming pools. Now, if we know these two things, we can conclude that the houses on the east side probably have swimming pools as well. As another example, suppose I'm considering buying a car that is the same year, make, model, and has the same amount of mileage as cars of 5 other people that I know. Now, if I know that all 5 other cars get at least 30 miles a gallon, then it's also likely that the car I'm considering gets 30 miles a gallon. And so that is how an argument from analogy works. It can be with a group or with an individual. As we consider standards of strength of analogical arguments, there are 2 main things to keep in mind. The first and foremost, the primary issue, is the relevance of the similarities that are being considered. For the car illustration, we mentioned the year, make, model, and the mileage on the vehicle. Those are all relevant to gas mileage. We did not mention the colors of the car, the rims of the wheels, stickers on the windows, things like that. They are irrelevant to gas mileage, so they're not mentioned. If we could increase the number and varieties of instances in the group we're comparing the individual thing to, or the smaller group to, then that would strengthen the analogy. So for example, if I had 10 similar cars that also had the same mileage, were the same make, model, and year, and were also from different parts of the country, we would have greater number and also a greater variety, then that would strengthen the argument. If, assuming, of course, they all got at least 30 miles to the gallon, gives you all the more reason to believe that the car in question will get 30 miles to the gallon. Now, fallacies occur with analogies when irrelevant features are emphasized. And so, as we mentioned with the cars, you want to only focus on features that are relevant to gas mileage. If you're buying a computer and you want to know about the efficiency, the color, the monitor it's hooked to, those kinds of things are not relevant. You need to focus on the things relevant for efficiency in the computer, the size of the hard drive, the amount of memory, the processor speed, those kinds of things. A fourth inductive argument form is an argument from authority. Now, these are technically a specific form of statistical syllogism, and that is when the authorities in the area are usually correct. And they can be good arguments, sometimes they can be bad, but they can be good only when 2 criteria are met. When the authority who is speaking in the area of her expertise, that has to be the case. And also there has to be agreement among authorities about that particular issue. So There can be a fallacious argument from authority if either of those standards of strength are not met. If the person is not an expert in the area addressed, or if there is no consensus among the experts. So, for example, if a sports columnist who has no training in politics or polling predicts that Dwayne Johnson will win the next presidential election, and we conclude from that that Johnson will win the election, we commit an error in reasoning. Even if the sports columnist is excellent at covering sports, they are speaking outside their area of expertise when they go into politics. Also, when the so-called political pundits are often split on a topic, so for example, whether or not increasing taxes is going to be good for the country, and you have political pundits that are going to be split on that type of topic, so there isn't going to be consensus, then in that case, it doesn't matter how much authority you may think the individual pundit has. It doesn't matter if it's a former president of the United States or someone with a PhD from Harvard. If there's no consensus on the topic, the particular argument from authority is not going to be helpful. A fifth inductive argument is an ad hominem argument, which means an argument against the person. Most often, these are presented in a way that is fallacious, but these are arguments based on the fact that a person is almost always wrong when speaking about a particular topic. So these can be good arguments. So suppose I'm notoriously bad at predicting Oscar winners. Now, given my generally horrendous track record, if I claim that Frozen 2 will win Best Animated Feature, that would give you good reason to think that it won't. Right? If it's known that I'm really bad at doing that prediction, and I make a prediction, you have good reason to think I'm wrong. Now, this type of argument will be fallacious if the attack against the person is irrelevant to what's being said, and that is extremely common, which is why you have this form of argument typically presented as a fallacy. But this is why it would be a fallacy when it's irrelevant to the individual. So, for example, if somebody says that meteorologist is a Republican, so you shouldn't trust your forecast, well, the political party a meteorologist is in has nothing to do with how well they function in predicting the weather. So that would be a fallacy. Finally, our sixth argument form that we're going to consider, a type of inductive argument that is an argument from consensus. This is an appeal to the majority of opinion. Now, these can be good if and only if it's important to the issue what most people think. So, for example, determining what is harassment or determining what is pornographic could be made by an appeal to consensus. In fact, legal cases have done this in the past. These can also be good when the consensus is considered from a limited group, and we have reason to think that members of that group are generally correct about a topic. So, for example, if I were at a history conference and there was a broad audience of historians and I had forgotten when the Battle of Hastings was and I wanted to know that, I could just ask the group, and if I hear a nearly unanimous response of it's 1066, well, then I know that that's when the Battle of Hastings was. At least I have good reason to conclude that that's the case, because I have good reason to conclude that that group of people would know the answer to that question. If I were to ask that same group of people about who's most likely to win the national football championship, or the college football championship, and even if I got a consensus in the response, that would be a mistake, because that particular group, that consensus is probably irrelevant in the case of determining who's going to win the college football championship.